from Christ, from the Catholic Church. He wanted everyone to feel welcomed as much as he could do within the confines of the teaching here. And talk about that.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he reached out to folks that, as you've heard this morning, and some controversially, whether it was the washing the feet of a Muslim woman during the Last Supper, the Mass of the Last Supper. I mean, that was controversial and shocked a lot of people. And having native tribesmen in the Vatican doing their rituals and things like that. Again, just were very off-putting, and he really upset a lot of people. At the same time, if you look at it from the perspective of, here is a man who's trying to just reach out and let everybody know that the Catholic Church, the word Catholic means universal. So it's a church for everyone and is open to everyone. Now, that's the good part. The bad part, that's, you heard everyone said the good and bad.
And that's why I said to a fault, maybe, according to some. It's like a catch-22 almost.
Right. The Catholic Church stands for certain things, and so you have to balance the reaching out with not compromising what believed in him or not. He wanted you and he loved you, and Pope Francis wanted to let you know that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Rick Santorum, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing such a personal story, too. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So last year, Newsmax senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano spent a week at the Vatican where he dined with the Pope. Judge joins us now. Judge, can you tell us about that dinner and what you took away from that meeting?
So the Vatican has a university called the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. The university has no professors and no students.
Okay.
But you don't have to worry about
quite the university.
Yes. But they invite people in. They invite scholars in for 4-day weekends, many of the weeks of the year, and the scholars interrogate each other. I was asked to join a group and to give a paper on natural rights and the natural law, the theory that our rights come from our humanity, same as what Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence. We each spoke for about a half an hour, and then the other academics in the group interrogated us. This went on for about 4 days. When this was being arranged, the Vatican called and said, look, we'll put you up at any 5-star hotel in Rome that you want, but would you mind living where the Pope lives, in the Pope's guest house? Would I mind? Of course I'd be thrilled to do that. So we stayed in the Pope's guest house, and we dined in his dining room, and in 2 of those dinner meetings, he was there. Now, there were 25 of us. There were 8 at each table. He sat at his own table. Bob, he was about as close to me as you and I are now.
Dining with the Pope.
He was very shy. He really didn't say anything. Not like John Paul II, who would have gone around probably and said hello to everybody. When we arrived, the Swiss guard said, don't call him by name. Don't touch him. And for heaven's sakes, don't take a selfie. So there he is. I'm this close to him. The producers are saying to me, don't you have a picture of yourself having dinner with him? No, I didn't.
You weren't allowed.
2 days later, I turn around in the hallway of the guest house, and there he is alone. And it's just the 2 of us. And I'm looking in his eyes as I'm looking in yours now. And I'm thinking, they said don't say hello to him. What am I going to say? So it went like this, Your Holiness. And he just looked at me and got in an elevator and left. So those were my 2 very brief and quite memorable encounters with him. He eventually issued a statement commemorating what the 25 of us were doing. It was the 750th anniversary of the death of St. Thomas Aquinas. Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State, who's a papabile, a potential successor, was with us. Cardinal Turkson, an African-American cardinal, also a papabile. He was in our group. But the Pope was with us very briefly.
Judge, we got just a couple seconds here, but just personally to you, what did that experience do for you?
Well, it was a memorable experience. I had seen John Paul II and Benedict XVI at great distances, but to be this close to the Vicar of Christ was something you don't forget. I am a critic of his. I'm not going to give the reasons for the criticism. Now I'm a traditionalist. I go to a Latin Mass. He tried to suppress the Latin Mass, all those things. But look at the outpouring of emotion and appreciation that is coming for him today. and you can see how he touched people. You can imagine how he touched people who got very close to him and didn't expect it.
Yeah.
What a special experience.
Indeed.
I know one that you will never forget.
And the food wasn't too bad either.
I was going to ask. You're the biggest food critic, so you're telling me it was good?
You know, he lived in the guest house as opposed to the Apostolic Palace. So instead of splendor,
humble.
Right, he had a humble 3-room suite. I wasn't invited into the suite. The guest house is like a small boutique hotel with about 60 rooms and 1 suite for the Pope.
I'm sure it's lovely. All right, Judge, thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
All right, we want to go back to Washington now with White House correspondent John Gizzi. Great to have you back with us. John, what do you think the Pope's legacy will be?
Well, very simply, I think the legacy of the Pope is seen in the outpouring of mourning for him, not just in the Vatican, but worldwide. Here at St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington, the rector, Monsignor Ron Jameson, put out a very strong statement focusing on the Pope's love for all humanity and his outreach to Catholics and non-Catholics alike. The great outreacher, I believe, is the way that Pope Francis will be remembered, and someone who was very different from most of his, if not all of his successors.
On what made him so different, do you think? His upbringing, where he came from, humble beginnings, kind of when he entered into the papacy, I feel like he remained the same almost the whole, you know, there was no like changing, you know, he was him.
Well, as was noted previously, this is a pope who was a janitor, a barroom bouncer. In interviews, he liked to remind people that before he made the decision to go into the priesthood, he had a girlfriend, and he used to smile and laugh, telling reporters that. He was a very different kind of a pope. Most of those who sit on the throne of St. Peter's have spent a lifetime enmeshed in theology, history, liturgy, and just in being priests. Really, he was not like that, and that's why his election served as a big surprise back in 2013. I might add that's when I came to Newsmax, and when people asked how long have I been with Newsmax, I said I've been on my job as long as the Pope.
And we are so glad that you woke up extra early and decided to join us this morning from Washington. John Gizzi, thank you.
Thank you.
So for more on the life and legacy of Pope Francis, editor of our Sunday Visitor magazine, Father Patrick Mary Briscoe, joins us now. Father, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to ask you, what do you think his legacy will be?
Good morning, friends. Pope Francis will be remembered, I believe, as the Pope of Mercy. This was his great spiritual teaching. It was his emphasis from the very first moments of his papacy. Some of my own personal memories of Pope Francis are connected to this teaching, in fact. When I was in Krakow with millions of young people for World Youth Day in 2016 during the extraordinary Jubilee of Mercy. And I say mercy because he had so many efforts to reach out to all kinds of people, to that they would know, rather, so that all kinds of people would know the mercy of God, the abundant love of God. So I firmly believe, I deeply believe that's a key part of Pope Francis' legacy and what we'll all be remembering him for.
Yeah.
Father, I want to ask you, you said you spent a lot of time with young people. Talk about, we haven't discussed this, I don't think yet, the impact that Pope Francis had on the hundreds of millions of young Catholics and young people in general all around the world, because he did reach out to so many different groups, many not considered traditional by some of the Catholic faith.
He certainly did, and even young people that would be more traditional maybe than the Holy Father's own preference, these young people loved him. They loved the Pope. And he was very intentional about the way that he reached out to them. Young people will remember Pope Francis as a guide in, I think, above all, the spiritual life that Pope Francis has taught them to pray and to love the Lord and to evangelize, to be bold. You know, Pope Francis' first great letter that I'll remember is the joy of the gospel. And with that emphasis of going out, I think many young people were encouraged in their own practice of the faith. And we're certainly seeing that in the rise of devotion among young Catholics, not just in the United States, but globally. The numbers of young people entering the church this Easter were remarkable. And I think part of that, no doubt, is because of the way that Pope Francis reached out and encouraged them in their living of the faith.
And we're hearing so many speak about the Pope this morning, and everyone says the same thing. He led with his heart. Could you touch on that?
He did, and I think that everyone says that because Pope Francis was more spontaneous, I think, than certainly Pope Benedict, who had a kind of regal sense in the way that he carried his office. Pope Francis chose to embody the Petrine ministry, the spirit of the ministry of Peter, in a way that I think for many people was more approachable, in a way that was certainly off the cuff, in a way that allowed them to see the Pope as a man, but a man they could trust.
And so, again, talking about his legacy here, Father, when thousands flock to the Vatican over the next several days to mourn the loss of Pope Francis, they'll be remembering and thinking about what, do you think, when they say their final farewell?
Well, certainly, I think they'll be remembering the way that Pope Francis engaged the world, and certainly beyond here, I'm talking about the confines of just the Catholic faithful. Pope Francis, of course, is known for his environmentalism with his great teaching in Laudato Si. People will be thinking of that. They'll be thinking of how Pope Francis was a leader for the best of mankind, how Pope Francis wanted to build a kind of common humanity, to promote a vision of life that was positive and that would promote the common good. I think that's certainly at the forefront of the Pope's legacy, that he was not just a leader for the Catholic Church, but a leader for the world. And that comes to a fruition in certain particular teachings, again, like his approach to the environment. And even more importantly, I would say the way that he was a steward and representative of peace throughout the world.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning and giving us more insights into the Pope's legacy. Really appreciate it.
Friends, God bless you.
You
God
too.
bless.
So Newsmax host Bianca de la Garza detailed Pope Francis and the legacy he left on Argentina. Take a look.
Early in his religious life, long before becoming Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio was indoctrinated into a so-called theology of the people in his native Argentina.
We, the people from the villa, thank Pope Francis because he remembered us. He was always with us here before going to Rome.
Delmo Bergoglio was a cousin of Pope Francis.
He came a few years ago and visited the old house. He took a handful of earth from the ground here and he took it with him to his country.
His emphasis on poverty was reflected in his choice of papal name, Francis, after Saint Francis of Assisi, symbolizing austerity and service to the poor. But like St. Francis, many popes have said they wish to elevate the poor, going back to antiquity, such as Pope John Paul II or Pope Leo XIII. What was different about Pope Francis was his deep-rooted and vocal skepticism of capitalism. Pope Francis viewed wealth as a vice. Indeed, Francis's position on capitalism had long been a feature of Argentinian socialists running for office.
The other contenders cannot understand when Pope Francis says that crude capitalism creates social injustice, as they surely don't have on their agenda, as I have, the new rights, the 3 T's, land, housing, and jobs for all Argentines.
This anti-capitalist ideology was reflected throughout Francis's papacy, says Luis Rosales, a Francis biographer. So much so that Francis made inroads into communist China.
He signed a kind of treaty between China and the Vatican, and probably in the following years, the Catholic Church is going to be the only one church authorized by the Communist Party in China.
Pope Francis never went back to Argentina after he became Supreme Pontiff, which did not go unnoticed here in Buenos Aires.
The only thing I disagree with is that he hasn't come to South America.
And Argentina has dramatically changed direction politically. Javier Milei, a libertarian economist who proudly advocates U.S.-style free market principles, was just elected president. Milei had been a fierce critic of Francis, calling him a filthy communist and accusing him of being the devil's representative on earth, although they finally reconciled after he took office. And the people of Buenos Aires remember his advocacy for the poor rather than his crusade against capitalism.
I think he's always in favor of the poor, and I believe that's fine.
Very good and generous.
Very good, very respectful, good-hearted, with Latin blood.
For Newsmax, I'm Bianca De La Garza.
All right, that was Bianca De La Garza with that special report. If you're just joining us, we woke up this morning to the news that Pope Francis passed away this morning at the age of 88 years old. He had been ill for some time, but seemed to be a little on the mend. You know, he'd been making some public, appearances, and of course, his last appearance so poignant that it was yesterday, Easter Sunday. He was able to address the masses there at the Vatican, blessing everyone there. Really, the last words that we ever heard from him were, "Christ is risen."
I think it's an incredible way, to go out. When you think about it, clearly he was ill. You saw the pictures, even the post on X that Vice President Vance put out. He said he was clearly ill. To have the strength to get out there and ride through the crowd and the Pope Mobile and then give his blessing and even just speak a couple words just screams how dedicated he was to being the Pope, obviously, and to the people and to the faith and, and making it to the holiest day of the year. When you knew he was so sick, I just think is a heroic effort for Pope Francis, and what a way to go.
Yeah, and always thinking of everyone else. We're learning a lot about his legacy and what he will be remembered, for this morning. And so many saying he led with his heart. He cared for everyone, and he wanted to bring Christianity and Catholicism to everyone, to all corners of the world. And that's what he did for his 12 years as Pope.
Certainly did. And look, there's some controversy. No one's going to love everything you do.
Right.
But to your point, he'll be remembered for reaching out to, I think, everyone, but to a lot of groups traditionally that were, maybe not reached out by the Catholic Church
felt
for
forgotten.
a long time.
Right.
Forgotten. And knowing that they had a home. And I've talked with some people in those crowds, and boy, did they appreciate that. Feeling like that they were welcomed, in the Catholic Church, and had a Pope that's willing to bless them and say, hey, you still have a home here and you can come here and you can worship and God loves you. I think that was huge for a lot of people.
Yeah, 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide. Everyone in mourning this morning and for the next few days as we now prepare for Pope Francis's funeral. Much more on the life and legacy of Pope Francis in our next hour. What a life. 1936 to 2025, 88 years Pope Francis was on this earth. He was Pope for the last 12. We are all learning this morning of his passing. He died at 7:35 a.m. Vatican time. We learned of it about 4 a.m. this morning, and we've been covering this all morning. And we do want to go to a special report by Newsmax foreign correspondent Alex Salvi on the life of Pope Francis.
As the first non-European pope, the former Jorge Bergoglio of Buenos Aires, Argentina, became a historical figure, rising through the ranks of Catholicism, from Archbishop of Buenos Aires to being a member of his church's governing board, the College of Cardinals. Bergoglio always maintained a common touch. In 2013, following the surprise abdication of Pope Benedict XVI, the College of Cardinals elected Argentina's Bergoglio as the new pope.
Buonasera.
4 months after assuming the throne of St. Peter, he stunned many Catholics by seeming to reverse his church's traditional position on homosexuality. Quote, "If a gay person is in search of God, who am I to judge them?" he told reporters on his official airplane before quickly backtracking from that position. Pope Francis also continued to apologize to the families of children abused by pedophile priests in what was inarguably Catholicism's biggest scandal. In 2016, he hinted strongly that then presidential candidate Donald Trump was not a Christian because of his support of a wall along the border. The audience with Trump when he became president did not go well, but Francis did have cordial meetings with Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
He challenged the Trump administration in its opening days, nominating Robert McElroy as Bishop of Washington, D.C., a vocal critic of the new administration tasked with pushing the pontiff's vision in the U.S. Capitol. Francis himself frequently criticized the immigration policies of President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance.
In 2023, in one of the rarest scenes in 2 millennia of Catholic Church history, Pope Francis presided over the funeral of his predecessor, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, bringing an end to a saga of 2 living popes living within the walls of Vatican City. The Pope, battling several health issues himself later in life, persisted through personal and global turmoil, praying for peace in Ukraine and calling on Moscow and Kyiv to negotiate, while establishing a Vatican peace envoy to assist in the efforts. He insisted that the Catholic Church was open to everyone, but he continued to try to thwart the efforts of traditional Catholics to worship in the Latin Rite, used by the Church for 2,000 years, in favor of the vernacular Mass, more in use since the 1970s. It kick-started a series of events over the coming years that would pit progressive members of the Church against traditionalists, such as suggesting it may be possible to bless same-sex unions, again extending a hand to the community, much like he did years before. Francis also opened up the Church to women, significantly increasing the Vatican's female workforce, including in high-ranking positions.
His final acts, however, focused on securing his legacy as a liberal reformer whose worldview lives on after his passing. And his successor is tasked with taking on these sensitive issues. And with over 70% of voting-age cardinals appointed by Francis, the next pope will likely share his vision for the Church.
In the days following Pope Francis's death, there are those who will call for him to be canonized. In other words, to be made a saint to be prayed to. Others will declare him a heretic. As in life, there is very little middle ground. He will surely be remembered as a spiritual leader of consequence, and one whose career was shrouded in controversy. In Vatican City, for Newsmax, I'm Alex Salvi.
And thank you for watching this special edition of Wake Up America. This morning, we all woke up to the news that Pope Francis passed away at the age of 88, and we've been talking about his life and his legacy here this morning. So much to dive into. Joining us now is pastor of St. Catherine of Alexandria Parish in the Archdiocese of New York, Father Rob McEwen. Thank you so much, Father, for joining us. For you personally, what will you remember most about Pope Francis?
So I think one thing is something that Cardinal Dolan actually had said. He's my Archbishop. He had said this a few years ago. He says, the Holy Father's writings are almost like he's being our examination of conscience for us, because he would not shy away from the tougher issues and make us think a bit, to consider how do we feel toward certain people, or how do we deal with not only our own sin, but the sin of others. So I think that's one thing this Holy Father will stick with me personally, because as you read some of his documents, he would challenge you to think, he would challenge you to reflect on, again, what's in your own conscience, as he would write to priests and to others. So I think for me personally, that's the best.
Yeah. Father, how do you think the people of the Church came to terms with that, taking on some of those tougher issues? I think probably it could go both ways. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. He does. We would sort of semi-joke among my brother priests sometimes to say, "Gee, I wish he wouldn't make comments on an airplane," if you know what I mean. So, because sometimes he would just talk off the cuff, and some of the ways that sometimes it was the translation, quite frankly, as the American press would, I think in some ways misinterpret, but other times he would just sort of off the cuff say certain things, and it would cause confusion. It would cause us even in parishes to have to start explaining things. Well, he didn't necessarily mean this or that, but it's never good to have that confusion sometimes. certainly in the Catholic faith, because there's such a stability of our tradition and our teachings. So he would both get us to think and reflect on our own conscience, but at the same time, it sometimes caused confusion among the people of God, and meant that we had to do some explaining on the local level.
Yeah. And we know that, it's God's timing, right? We never know when our last day will be, but wow. I mean, for his last message publicly to be to the people and the masses there at the Vatican on Easter Sunday, and for his last words to be Christ is risen. How poignant is that?
Yeah, that's a very good point you make, actually. Yeah. There's actually a beautiful ancient greeting in Greek, in Latin, that is specifically an Easter greeting that is used by the church, and that is the words "Christ is risen." The response is, "Indeed, he is risen." So it's like an Easter greeting that would be an exchange between people, and especially Catholics and those in the Orthodox faith as well. So for him to proclaim those words on Easter Sunday, not even realizing himself that he wouldn't live too many more hours, and it's going to be something to live on for years and years as a very, very poignant message as he enters into the next life. As you may know too, in the Catholic faith and in the Orthodox faith, we celebrate Easter for 8 days straight. So starting on Easter Sunday all the way up until next Sunday, the church celebrates Easter all throughout this week. So this morning I had Mass. We prayed the Gloria, which is not normal for a daily Mass, but we do that during the octave, what's called the octave of Easter, which is the 8 days. So to hear those words and those last words of the Holy Father is very poignant and a great cause for reflection.
Well, that's just it, Father. I think a lot of people are reflecting, when someone passes away, you tend to, and you want to, and you should remember, the good parts about it. And he made the clergy, the staff, but the parishioners, he made you think in a different way that I don't think had been done in a long time in the Catholic Church. Yeah,
good point. Very good point. And as I said earlier, that thinking process is never a bad thing. Even to have some of those conversations with people and to hear, what their point of view is, and to get people talking among themselves. As long as you're doing it out of love, and you have to seek the truth. You have to seek the truth revealed by God and by His Son Jesus Christ through the Church. That's the key, and it's not bad to have these, because you want to make sure that you are truly loving the sinner but hating the sin, and that's the important distinction to make.
Yeah. Absolutely. Father Ramakian, thank you so much for joining us on this day to remember Pope Francis. Thank you.
God bless you and happy Easter.
You too.
God bless. Happy Easter, Father.
We want to welcome back in our Newsmax foreign correspondent, Alex Salvi. He is live for us this morning in Vatican City, where so many are beginning to gather.
Yeah, Charlotte, Bob, good morning to you both. Thousands of people still gathering here in St. Peter's Square to pay their final respects to Pope Francis. And we know that they'll be able to likely over the next 9 days as the church enters this period of mourning. And really the events of this morning, beginning when the Vatican announced that Pope Francis passed away at 7:35 a.m. local time, they kick off this series of rituals that really has been performed over the past centuries leading up to today. Now, when it comes to Pope Francis, as we've been talking about all morning, he was a reformist in many ways, so he may have requested a deviation from some of those practices. We know that dating all the way back to the passing of Pope Benedict XVI, when Pope Francis actually presided over his funeral, marking an unprecedented event within itself. Ever since then, Pope Francis has been planning for this day, so we are going to get to see kind of the last manifestation of what he wanted his final moments here on earth to look like. Now, when it comes to what takes place right now, the Vatican enters this period known as sede vacante, meaning the seat is vacant, meaning any daily responsibilities here at the Vatican are handed over to the College of Cardinals. Now, they can't make any major changes, of course, until a new pope is named, but the series of events that take place throughout the day, ones that are, once again, a symbolic gesture saying that his time here leading the Catholic Church is over as it transitions to a new period. Now, what we know for certain is that Pope Francis will be buried in a coffin tonight. We're hearing it'll take place at 8 p.m. local time, and that'll set up that presentation period where people from around the world can come here to Vatican City and pay their final respects over this 9-day period where it's a mourning period for the Catholic Church, as well as Italy. We're hearing that Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni will be issuing a statement as well very shortly. We know that world leaders, including the White House, have already released their own statements. So right here in Vatican City, I would say a very somber move to some degree, but also a degree of celebration, acknowledging what Pope Francis did for the Catholic Church over the past 12 years.
Yeah, and Alex, I know that you lived in Rome for some time now, and you're there in Vatican City today. What are you hearing from people that are gathering and beginning to mourn the death of this Pope?
Yeah, well, we talked about this last hour, and I think it's a really important thing to address that as Pope Francis went through these illnesses over the past couple of years, he didn't go through them alone. He went through them with worshipers as well, who would tune in every single day and try to keep in those moments. We saw him reach out to worshipers, as you were just talking about, whether it was coming out to the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica or greeting worshipers in the Pope Mobile, when we know evidently that he was not up to the top part of his health. Just doing those things was his way of reaching worshipers, and I think it's really felt here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, we just heard you mention that so many world leaders are reaching out, across the globe. And I believe we have a message here from Donald Trump as well. He posted, offering his condolences to all of the Catholic people as well, and saying, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May God bless him and all who loved him." Alex Selvey, thank you so much for your reporting there in Vatican City. We'll see you a bit later on. And we know that J.D. Vance was also there, one of the last public officials to meet with the Pope yesterday. How special that must have been.
A moment he'll never forget.
Yeah.
And he also said that the Pope appeared to be very ill yesterday, too. And it's something we've discussed all morning. We'll discuss all day. The fact that he had the will and the ability to go out and speak on Easter Sunday yesterday, take rides in the Pope Mobile. There's a picture of the Vice President, the Pope, and others there at the Vatican. It's incredible that he did that, and what a way to go. And I think it says a lot just about, his fortitude and who he was. As we talked this morning, Charla, about his big heart and always working.
Yeah.
And, not somebody who was, sitting in the office, behind a desk. He really got out there and he did it to his very last
day.
day.
And on his last day, Easter Sunday, offering that blessing to the masses. What an incredible final message. One of his last words were, "Christ is risen." So that's what all Christians and Catholics can take with them on this morning as the period of mourning begins. For more on the legacy of Pope Francis, we want to welcome in senior political analyst and former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum, along with host of America Right Now, Tom Basile. Great to see you both again. Thank you guys for taking the time. I know you both have personal stories about what this Pope, meant to you. Senator, I'll start with you. What do you think his legacy will be?
I think his legacy will be a convoluted one, candidly. I think it'll be a legacy, as you have all stressed, I think rightfully so, of someone who is trying to reach out and, as Father Patrick Mary said, show God's mercy and love for all, whether you're a Catholic or even a Christian, that Jesus is God and Lord of all, and that he has mercy and love, and it's open to everyone. And I think he believed that, he lived that, and he certainly pursued that. And then you heard others like Father McKeon, who talked about the confusion that the Pope's more casual style. He wasn't a theologian. If you go back to John Paul II and Benedict XVI, the prior, and even popes before that, most of them were steeped in canon law and theology. And but that's not, as you've mentioned, he was a bouncer. He was a janitor. I mean, he came up from very humble beginnings. He was not a theologian or a scholar, and he spoke in language that was sometimes just not clear and often confusing, in an attempt to be merciful, an attempt to try to show his heart to those who were outside of the teachings of the church. He would say things that certainly ruffled feathers. And so it's that conflict that his pontificate will be remembered, but I think certainly his heart, as people have said, and I've said, that he governed from his heart, and I think that will be the most positive legacy that will live with us with Pope Francis.
Tom, what do you think?